Welcome to Joy Unfiltered. I'm Rachel, and this is a podcast about joy. Not the shiny, performative kind, not the everything happens for a reason kind. This is joy as a strategy, a way to stay steady when life feels loud, a way to stay human when things are hard, a way to lead, love, and live without burning out or checking out. Some episodes will be just me. Some will be honest conversations with people who have lived their way into a deeper, truer joy. No fixing, no bypassing, just real stories, real tools, and room to breathe. Let's get into it. Well, welcome back to Joy Unfiltered. I am Rachel, your host, and I have been so excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. I have Dr. Katie McIntyre with me, and she does so many similar things to what I do and to what we talk about on this podcast. So let me introduce her before we get this amazing conversation started. So Katie is a founder and CEO of Joyful Leadership Academy. I am just, again, thrilled to have her on. She is a speaker, author, coach, and leadership researcher who helps organizations create thriving workplaces through joyful leadership. Again, all the things that we talk about here on this podcast. She has worked with organizations of all sizes to strengthen leadership and workplace culture, delivering meaningful outcomes for teams and organizations. Katie has published multiple book chapters and peer-reviewed journal articles and regularly presents her work at national and international conferences. So welcome, Katie.
Thank you for that very kind introduction.
Absolutely. Well, as I said, and listeners, you are really in for a treat today, or maybe not, because I think Katie and I are just going to nerd out a little bit about all things joyful leadership, or as we call it, joy-led leadership, but same thing. So, but before we get started, we'd just love to know like where we're finding you today, and if you want to give us, any kind of fun facts or a little bit of background on you, we love to know more about our guests.
Amazing. Yeah. I think I've been feeling exactly the same. I've been so excited about this conversation, so excited to talk with you because, the idea of spreading this idea of joyful leadership to the world is something I'm incredibly passionate about. And Rachel, I know you are too. So fun facts about me. I love being the CEO of the Joyful Leadership Academy. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. It started through my own leadership journey, and then I've been able to kind of share that knowledge, experience, learning with other leaders. So very excited about that. I'm joining you from Australia. It is 6:30 a.m. in the morning here. So up bright and early, and just really excited to be here.
That is great. So one of the things I thought that I read on your website, but you can tell us more about it, is what was the impetus, or was there kind of this shining moment or something that you said, aha, this leadership thing, or this is about joy? Was there tell us the inspiration to how you opened the Joyful Leadership Academy?
Yeah, so it really started because I was working in leadership roles. So I've previously worked as a school principal. I was a chief operating officer of an aeromedical airline. So in these leadership roles, and I was seeing really consistently through my own work, but then also working with other leaders. And I'm sure, Rachel, you've seen this yourself, but just seeing how leaders were making such a significant impact, either in a really positive way, and sometimes in not such a positive way. And they were, you know, really struggling in terms of their own leadership, but also in terms of how they were impacting employees. But then I also saw there were these places where it worked really, really well. And you could see that teams were working well. There was this really positive kind of vibe. And I was really interested to kind of understand what was going on and what was the difference. And at the same point in time, I actually received an article, a Harvard Business Review article, and it kind of came through this email. And so the first I knew about it, I got this email and it said, "It looks like this is your thing." That was it. That's all it said. And then I went, "Oh, this is really interesting." I opened it up. It was a Harvard Business Review article, and it said, "People are looking for joy in the workplace, but they're not finding it. It's not there." So I'm seeing how leaders have this impact. I'm seeing that people are looking for this joy. And so then I kind of went and started looking for the research around joyful leadership. And I went, surely people have had this conversation. Surely this research is there. But as you know, Rachel, it wasn't. It wasn't there. We needed to kind of start having these conversations. And so that really started me on the journey of doing the PhD. I was finishing off my MBA at that point in time. I'd done a number of kind of research subjects. So I'd actually fallen in love with this idea of research and understanding things in this deep way. And so then it kind of prompted me to do joyful leadership as my PhD. And then once that PhD was finished, the Joyful Leadership Academy was born out of that, because I wanted to then share this knowledge, share these ideas, share this understanding with leaders right across the world. So, yeah, that was kind of where the passion as well as the academy was born.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So what was your, again, we're going to nerd out a little bit today. What was your dissertation topic? Or what was the title of your
So
dissertation?
it's literally called "What is Joyful Leadership?"
I love
That's
it.
what
Okay,
it's
so
called.
through that then, what is your definition of joy?
Yeah. Okay. So for me, joyful leadership is characterized by a sense of warmth and lightheartedness. It's very relational, so it's very relationship based, but not at the expense of achieving outcomes, but actually in order to promote outcomes. The other part about joyful leadership as a style is it has calm consistency. And so, what we really found in the research is that this warmth, but with a calm consistency to it, actually enabled people to feel really trusting and really kind of connected to the leader. And so it's really interesting, because one of the things we found with the dissertation was that actually joyful leadership enhances well-being, but it also enhances engagement. And, you know, the interviews I was doing, I mean, Rachel, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know, but the interviews I was doing were people were saying they actually moved organizations just to be with a joyful leader. They said they gave far more. They said their well-being was much better. They said they could admit when they made mistakes. They felt really, you know, cared for in that environment. And so then, you know, we had these interviews, and then we looked at the kind of outcomes, and we measured it, and we did a lot of quantitative analysis around this as well. And again, what we found is it has really positive outcomes for the employees, but we saw for the leader themselves, there's some really positive outcomes there as well. So yeah.
That's fascinating. So I just want to make sure that I got, because I'm taking notes. If you are driving, please do not take notes while you're driving, but you can listen to this, you can listen to it again. But the ones that I took, you talked about warmth, it was
Yeah.
lighthearted, relationship based, and with this calm consistency.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And what we found was that calm consistency was really important. You know, a lot of people thought of joyful leadership as this really kind of exuberant leadership style. And certainly there's a place for that. Yeah, there's a place for celebration and excitement and all of those type of things. But in actual fact, as you know, that's not what joy is. Joy is a much deeper kind of emotion. It's not this just being cheerful and happy, and it's also not being about cheerful or happy all the time. It's actually about returning to this place of joy and enabling joy to be developed in others as well. So we looked at this kind of idea of emotional contagion as being really important, you know. So yeah, it's yeah, they're kind of the common characteristics we saw.
No, I love that. Yeah, one of the things that I think about joy, and I talk about joy too, that it's not this big thing, right? It is small things throughout the day. Like my cat just jumped up on my lap. So, these like small things that we experience throughout the day. And then and I want to talk a little bit about resilience, but the whole piece about emotional regulation, right? So that if we are able to experience these small, tiny pieces, right, of joy, it doesn't necessarily get us into this frenzied space. It gets us into that calm consistency, or that space where we are emotionally regulated, so that then we can make better decisions, right? Or be more collaborative, or be more relational. So talk to me a little bit about resilience, and how, like, what's the relationship between joy and resilience?
Well, that was actually what the PhD findings were, what the dissertation findings were, because what it showed was that when we experience joy, and as you mentioned, it's not just feeling joy or happiness all the time. Like I talk about even just a presence check, for example. So before you go into a conversation, an important conversation, take a moment to actually go, am I calm? What do I want the other person to get out of this conversation? And how do I want them to feel? Just taking a moment to do that. They're the kind of simple things that can have a really profound and a really significant impact. Because what we found is that when a leader demonstrates joyful leadership, there's obviously that positive emotion, but through emotional contagion, others experience those positive emotions. When they experience those positive emotions, they build resilience. Because as we know, when people experience positive emotions, it broadens their horizons, it broadens their perspective. They look for connections, they look for resources, they look for all of these opportunities. When they experience negative emotions, we're more likely to narrow a focus and really shut down. And so when they do that, we actually found that actually led to greater resilience, which led to greater well-being and greater engagement. And what's really interesting, I think, with that is it's not just in that moment that has an effect, but in actual fact, going forward, and you talk about that idea of self-regulation, what we know is the more people experience these positive emotions, the more able they are to deal with the negative emotions when they do come. They're less intense. Sometimes they're shorter in duration because they've built up that resilience through those positive emotions and positive experiences. They've got more kind of resources to draw on.
Yeah,
Yeah, so really
absolutely.
quite a strong relationship.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that whole piece about that emotional contagion, and you said that a couple of times, and I think that that's such an important piece, that it can be emotional contagion when there is stress and negativity, right? So if you think of, I always talk about how you can sense when a leader walks in, or when any person walks into the room, and you can sense, oh my goodness, everybody gets stressed out because that leader is bringing in that stress. So that's contagious. And if stress can be contagious, joy can be contagious as well, right? Or that calm consistency, or that calmness can also be contagious. But I like the point that you were making as well about the fact that what if you practice being joyful, or you practice joyful leadership, that then builds up those skill sets. I mean, it's really a skill set, right? I mean, I'm assuming that in your leadership, that you talk about, that these are skills. It's not just something that you're born with. So if you're practicing these skills, then when something negative comes up, because we're not saying, or I don't think that you are saying, that you're walking around with rose-colored glasses and nothing negative ever happens, right? That we're saying if you practice the skills, when negative things happen or challenges happen, you're better able to handle those situations.
Oh, 100%. And yes, first to say absolutely not suggesting for 1 second that it's all rose-colored glasses and we're frolicking through the day. And I mean, I've worked in really complex organizations. I worked in an aeromedical airline that, we were supporting seriously ill children. I've worked with humanitarian leaders who were working in some of the most complex environments that we have. I'm not for 1 second suggesting we don't have negative emotions or that even that they're not useful, but absolutely it is a practice. We know that particularly with the emotion of joy, we can cultivate it. It is something that we can actually start to grow and develop more. I often use the example of the rain, for example, because we can start to see maybe neutral events or even negative events as being positive or more joyful. And I often use the rain as an example for that. Some people look at the rain and they, oh no, it's raining and it's going to be slippery and I've got the clothes on the line and it might be this really kind of negative thing. Some people go, oh, it's raining, didn't even notice, it's neutral. And it's for some people, it's like, oh, the smell of the rain is just beautiful, you can just see the grass growing, you can see the leaves shining, it's just this wonderful thing when the rain happens. And so what we can actually do is we can cultivate ways of seeing even negative or more neutral events in a more joyful way. And the other thing we know about joy is joy often happens when we are in that moment of connection with somebody else. So by cultivating connections, cultivating relationships, we are actually giving ourselves greater opportunity to experience joy as well. And we know that even in some of these incredibly complex situations, incredibly complex organizations, there are moments of extraordinary joy that we've seen, and that can be cultivated and developed. So yeah, there's really lovely ways of doing that. But yeah, definitely it's a skill and an ability and an emotion that we can cultivate and develop.
So if we pull in that thread a little bit more, so talking about those skills or those abilities, so I mean, joy feels kind of theoretical, right? What are the actual skills that you are helping people develop around joy?
Yeah, so I think so for one part, we have to make sure that the environment is really inclusive for people. It is really hard to cultivate joy when people are feeling excluded from an environment or then kind of feeling left out or not connected. And so creating these spaces where people can feel really part of something, part of the team, really connected is really important. So that's one of the skills. Being really mindful and being really present, I think, is another one where we can really focus on, and like I said, just a presence check, for example, just taking a moment to see, okay, where am I in this moment? How do I want the other person to feel? And actually being really intentional about that, I think, is really important. We see things like gratitude. So cultivating gratitude is a way that we can move from perhaps seeing some situations as either negative or neutral to being more positive. So, things like cultivating gratitude. And so, for example, one of the organizations I was a leader in, we had what we called the attitude of gratitude. And so at the end of every week, we're in the staff newsletter, people would anonymously put what they're grateful for. And so it could have been anything from, thank you to this person for, I was in a school, leading a school at the time. So thank you for covering my playground duty so I could go and watch my child's performance, or thank you for, to the cleaners for the amazing job they do every day, or, it could be anything, but we ended up with, 3 or 4 pages in the staff newsletter of things that people were grateful for. And what was really interesting is they thought they were doing it for somebody else. But in actual fact, what it was doing for them was actually creating this sense of gratitude in them, where they were spending the whole week looking for these positives. So again, we can do things like that where we actually start to look for the positives, and even leaders sharing positive stories. This kind of conversation, there's the opportunity to experience joy in a conversation like this because, we're connected, we're sharing ideas, maybe this supports another leader to develop their leadership practice, so cultivating different ways of showing gratitude, but also connecting. But being really present, I think, in the moment is another one too. One of the things we saw is that some leaders are very disengaged from those they're leading. And so again, engaging with those you're leading, but also engaging with your customers, engaging with your community. The engagement goes beyond just your staff to outside of that as well. So there's lots of things that leaders can be doing to develop those kind of practices.
Yeah, and I love that. And I love the example that you shared about the gratitude, because one of the things that I wrote down when you first said gratitude, I thought, oh, yeah, that's great. And I feel as though sometimes we tell leaders to go do your gratitude journal at the beginning of the day, do those things. But I love how that you can incorporate that into the organization so that it doesn't feel forced and cheesy, but it really feels as though it's part of the practice of doing work. And I also like that you pointed out, because that is so true, while we think that we are doing it for someone else to say thank you for being amazing, that little piece of forcing our brains to look for good things, what we talk about that habit often on this podcast, is that if we start practicing finding good things, it's amazing how we are basically brainwashing ourselves, right? Because our brains cannot filter all of the information that we're being bombarded with, but yet we tell our brains either consciously or unconsciously what to look for, right? So that if we practice looking for the good stuff, our brain is going to show us more good things. And then it's just that cycle of, oh my goodness, I'm experiencing more joy and I didn't even realize it, right? I mean, it's kind of a tricky thing, but how amazing, right? So we might as well look for the good rather than look for the bad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that changes it from this idea that some people have about doing a big event, right? Or doing a big initiative or doing some kind of, oh, we're going to host a day or we're going to do something like that. Actually, as you said, it's the little practices, the small moments, the consistency throughout every day that actually makes the difference. It's not one big giant event, and people want to say, oh, what do we do? Do an appreciation day or something. Not saying appreciation is really important, but it's actually the consistency across day to day to day that actually makes a really big difference.
Yeah, that consistency. And then you also talked about ensuring that you are creating an environment that is safe to be able to do some of those things. And because that safety allows our nervous systems again to regulate and to let go, so that we can then experience more of that joy, because it's kind of that circular thing as well. One of the things that I was thinking about, and because this happens to me sometimes, is that I say the word joy and I get pushback, like, oh, that's fluffy. Or actually, and it was interesting, and I was having a conversation with a woman earlier today. I said, as a Gen X woman, some other Gen X woman though said to me, oh, that seems like a really feminine way to lead. And I had a visceral reaction to that. And I was trying to parse out, why did I have a visceral reaction to it? And is it feminine? And if it is, okay, fine. Like, let's call it whatever you want. But so I'm wondering, you can react to that particular statement as well, but also would love to know kind of what kind of pushback that you get, or what kind of resistance do you get when you say, I'm doing joyful leadership.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So my research started in this roughly about 5-6 years ago, and the pushback was much greater then. much greater than. I am so excited that we're in this phase where that happens less and less. I do completely get it. I have definitely early on seen people kind of, oh, it's fluffy, or no, we've got to get the job done, or, oh, does that mean you just have a good time all the time? These kind of questions or challenges. But what I love is that we are seeing less and less of that, because a lot of people are seeing this research, are doing the research, and they're seeing actually it has really good outcomes. I think historically there was kind of this idea that it either had to be you had this achievement or you had this kind of joyful leadership. And there was this kind of tension. You had to choose between the two. But actually now we know that that's not the case. We actually know that by having these kind of positive emotions, by having this joyful leadership, actually we now know that it gives us better outcomes, because we get less burnout, we get less quiet quitting, we get less employee turnover. We know that our employees want to stay in these joyful environments. But when that's lacking, when that's missing, the research that's been coming through is that actually it's a really negative outcome for people's well-being, but also for the organisation itself. And for those, I guess, who are more those who are focused on, I guess, the achievement and the economic side, and we need financial sustainability in our organisations, of course. It kind of actually promotes that financial sustainability, because when you think about it, what's the cost of high turnover of staff? It's massive. When we have high turnover, we're having to retrain staff, which is not only complex, but it's expensive. We're having to experience that down period where they're not producing. That can be up to 3 months where they're not producing at the same rate as an experienced staff member might. So we're seeing downturn, but also the loss of experience when we have staff leave is quite significant. So again, we're not saying choose between one or the other. We're actually saying one enhances the other. When you build these environments that are really joyful and really positive and really inclusive, you actually have better outcomes, and your staff are more engaged, and they don't, and I'm not saying they'll never leave, but they don't leave as often, and we have better retention. So actually the tension, that people used to feel existed isn't there anymore. And so I find now I have a lot less pushback, but also because this research has now been done, because people like you are doing fantastic things in this space, we actually have a lot more information to share with people and go, no, actually it's a positive thing, which is great.
Absolutely. And I think for me too, I think retention is part of it. I also think I talk about joy as a strategy. And so even if you're looking at the financial pieces of it, that it is a strategy in terms of decision making, right? Because when we are in a joyful space, and you have said this, we're more collaborative, we are more creative, we actually have more, that whole broaden in something theory by Barbara Fredrickson. We have more ability to look at a bigger picture and think about more creative solutions to our problems, right? So yes, it does retain people, but it also actually helps us think through the complex issues that we are having if we've adopted kind of that joyful mindset. So yeah, absolutely. So what do you think, besides more information? I'm super curious. What do you think was there a shift in the world? Was there a shift in Australia? Was there a shift in something that you are seeing that people are more open to, or are people just like, oh my goodness, we don't know what else to do, so I guess we can go with the joy thing because nothing else is working?
That's such a good question. I think it's a combination of things. I think it makes sense that historically we're focused more on negative emotions. So we've definitely seen an increase in the focus on positive emotions. And of course, we focused on negative emotions first because negative emotions are really apparent, but they're also, the outcomes are really significant, right, of those negative emotions. And then I see that it's part of this fantastic shift to go, actually, we understand negative emotions really well. Now it's time to understand what these positive emotions do and how they can support and what that looks like. And so definitely, certainly, probably even over the last 20 years, but even more recently, we've seen a big shift towards research around those positive emotions. So I think that's a big one. I also think we're seeing a generational shift in terms of a lot of our younger workers coming through are really wanting to be engaged. They're not kind of resolutely sticking with one organisation just because they've chosen to go there. If they want to be engaged, and also I think people are looking for purpose now too, and that's a big shift that I've really seen. I think joy, a big part of joy is having that real sense of purpose, isn't it? And so that's what I've seen too, is that people are looking for purpose. They're looking for meaning in their work. It's not just go to work, get a paycheck and kind of do that for the rest of your life. They actually want meaning. They want purpose. They want to be engaged in what they're doing. So I think that's been a shift that we've seen as well, which has kind of enabled this idea of joy in leadership to flourish, because we then, as leaders, need to create environments where people are flourishing, where people are really engaged, and they want to be there and they want to stay. And also, I think for us as leaders, it's really important. I was working with one leader once, and they said to me, Katie, I love my job, I love being a leader, but I don't like who it's made me become.
Mm-hmm.
And, that's heartbreaking to me, because, that's not the way you want a leader to feel. You want them to feel joy. You want them to feel passion. You want them to feel engaged. And so for me, it's actually about the leaders themselves too, going, you know what, I don't want to lose myself. I don't want to become a person I don't recognize or I don't like. I want to actually lead in a way that brings me joy, as well as the people around me joy. So I think that's been a big shift too.
Yeah, no, and I like that. And I think on that note about becoming somebody that you don't recognize or becoming something, one of the things, and I had this conversation earlier as well about how as leaders, and maybe this is more, although I think both men and women experience this, but for a long time it was, we kind of compartmentalized our personalities, that we had a home self and a work self. And I think we're finding that one, we don't need to do that, and two, that doesn't make us better leaders, right? But if we're able to bring full self, if we're able to bring an integrated self to work, we are better. We are better at our jobs, right? And that makes us then more joyful, because we don't then morph into somebody that we don't know, or morph into somebody that we don't like. But I think for such a long time it was this like, oh, I can have fun at home, but I can't have fun at work because it's serious, right? But we're finding that no, bring your whole self and have the fun both places. Again, we're not going to necessarily, you don't need to be exactly, you don't need to overshare or do all the things, but to bring whole self to work seems to be the better way. And again, kind of on my philosophy about what joy-led leadership looks like, or what joyful leadership looks like, is about that integration part. But yeah, so I think that's just interesting that you had that conversation with somebody who doesn't like who they became. Well, how do we change that, right? How do we change that?
Yeah. And I think that's what I'm loving about where we're at in terms of the work around this at the moment, because, if they wanted to be a more joyful leader, what did they do? without the resources, without the tools, without the understanding of what it is. Your book does that. It actually shows how do we use this as a strategy, as a leader? How do I do this? My aim with Joyful Leadership was actually to go, if you want to be a more joyful leader, here's the characteristics, here's what it looks like. These are the things you can kind of focus on. These are the kind of things you can work on, get better at. And it's really interesting. I was just reflecting before on what you said around this kind of gendered idea of joyful leadership. And it's really interesting because I did ask that as part of my research. And nobody was saying it is. Nobody was saying that it's particular to males or females. And in actual fact, just recently, one of the organisations I work with, beautiful organisation, they offered to do a testimonial video for the Joyful Leadership Academy. And it was actually the co-founders, and it was actually the male co-founder who said, I never knew what joyful leadership was. He said, he works in hospitality. So he said in hospitality, it had never been the way to lead. And he said he learned about joyful leadership, changed the whole way he led. He said it just, he said he was ecstatic when he found out about it, because he said he'd always wanted to lead differently, but didn't know how, because in his experience of hospitality, it was very serious business, and it was tell people what to do, and it was very directive, whereas that's his style. He said he just completely changed his style. So it's really so exciting when you hear stories like that from female as well as male leaders, that actually this can be applied across the board. And I think the difference is because it's not soft, it's not frivolous. Joy is actually really quite a deep emotion. As you know, it's actually quite a deep emotion, and it's quite an altruistic emotion too. We most often feel that sense of joy and connection with others. So often it's when we have a sense of purpose, doing good for the world, achieving the goals of our organisation, supporting our team, that we as leaders feel that joy. So it's actually a very serious kind of business in a sense. It's not this kind of frivolous thing that people might think. So yeah, I just had that reflection.
Yeah, well, and fascinating, two things that I got out of that as well, but fascinating to me that and I have worked in the hospitality industry before, so fascinating that the hospitality, like the industry of the hospitality doesn't feel fun, but yet hospitality is supposed to be all about, like, if you're on the guest side, if you're going out to dinner or staying at a hotel or doing on the guest side, it's all about the joy, right? But it's so interesting that the leadership piece hadn't like flipped that. So that's fascinating. But I think also that you were then able to give him or give them the language about this is what it is. So just even the definition and being able to give language and words and vocabulary that then people can start to think about and communicate and change their style. That's a beautiful gift then that you were able to give them for that. So that.
Yeah, and it's such a good point you make there, because sometimes it can kind of be two different things in terms of the language. It can be that experience of, hey, I changed my entire style, or actually sometimes it's, I always knew that I led like this, now I have a name for it. And I think
Yes.
that's really wonderful too. I mean, and I think that really it's very empowering for people to actually go, this is my style. I know what my style is. They'd kind of go, oh, I used to do it like this, but I never had a name for it. So now, that's what I find some people will say is actually, oh, I heard and I went, that's me, so which is lovely to hear.
Yeah, and more, I think if more of us are talking about that, because I think that for me is what I had found as well, is looking at, and kind of like your story as well, but looking at leaders who had been successful in what they were doing. And I saw that the through line was joy or joy-led leadership or joyful leadership, although they might not have defined it in that way, it really, that is what it is. And so the more in which, people like you can be talking about and providing language to this, I think that well, for me, just the more exciting that is. So in terms of some of the research that you did, I'm just curious because I'm a huge reader. Like, who are other people that you are reading, other researchers that you feel like are really out there kind of on the forefront of doing joyful leadership?
Look, I love some of the things that are coming through at the moment. Of course, your joys and strategy work is really important. I think people like Brene Brown have been doing beautiful work in this space for a very long time. I think she's definitely someone that I certainly read and love her work. But for me, what was really interesting about this is I didn't want to ever confine myself to just those of us who are having the same conversations too. And I know you have a similar perspective around this about really making sure it's a broad perspective, making sure that we look at as many perspectives as possible. For example, when I did my interviews, really collecting this information about joyful leadership, I actually talked with leaders in construction, military leaders, some of our Indigenous leaders, as well as, of course, in our health industry, in education. So actually getting the broadest perspective as possible is really interesting. The one I'm just reading at the moment is Ant Middleton. Does a book called Zero Negativity. So again, just a fantastic read. So getting as broad a perspective on this as possible, I think, is really important. But as I said, I love the work that you're doing, Brene Brown, people like that who really foster this important conversation, I think. And the more of us who are doing that, I think the more people can understand it, know it, learn how to work with it, to really experience joy in their lives, in their work lives. And what's really interesting is you talk about that, being one person at home or being one person at work, but we actually know the opposite works. In that we know if people are really struggling at work or if there's this really toxic environment at work, they're actually taking that home. And so it actually works in this kind of reverse negative way where this is happening and their home lives suffer. And we see it's awful. You see relationships break down and you see these things happen because they're struggling so much at work, and at home is kind of where they can relax, but they can't because all of this is being brought home with them. And you see the opposite as well. If you're having a really joyful time at work and then you're coming home and you're bringing that joy home, what a difference that makes. So so I love to get the insights from a broader range of people as possible, really.
Yeah, I know, and I like that. And I think that even speaks that whole, it's about integrating, but I also like the whole getting lots of different perspectives. I mean, you think about like the things that Sean Aker is doing. You think about, I love Kelly McGonigal and her Joy of Movement. I'm like a huge fan of Catherine Price and her The Power of Fun. And but I do think, and the same thing that you were thinking, the same thing that you found a few years ago too, there just needs to be more. And I'm hoping I'm going with you. I'm trusting that we are moving in that direction. I know sometimes here in the United States, it just feels like we're in such a challenging time right now. But yet when I say the word joy, people are gravitating towards that. So I'm hoping that we are, I don't want it to be an either or thing, but that I sometimes in darker times, if I dare say that, and I can because it's my podcast, in darker times, that sometimes we just need to see the light. So being able to focus on this joy stuff, not as fluff, but really as a necessity almost. And I think a lot of the research probably was done on negative emotions because, again, I think that's how we're built, or from what I know, as human beings, that we needed to make sure that we weren't getting killed by the tigers, right? And so that our brains are wired towards that negativity bias. I get that, but I love the fact, going back to how you said too, that joy is a skill, right? And so we just need to be building, it's that we can build these skills and build that through consistency to make those choices to become that joyful leader.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. It's not denying that we're in complex times. We certainly are. And the leadership role, it is really complex. I mean, we're in complex times, but the leadership role itself is really complex. It's not an easy thing to do. And so I think this idea of joy is not denying that or ignoring that or pretending that doesn't exist. It's actually saying, because it exists, because it's complex, because this is there, we actually need this more than ever. We need this, and it's crucial. It's really important that we create this joy. We create these spaces that are safe, inclusive, joyful spaces for people to operate in. And I love what you just said then around hoping, because for me, you said to me before about what kind of can people do. I think hope is actually a really positive way to start when it comes to building up to joy. We often see that hope kind of precipitates joy in a way as well. So have hope, and then you can start to feel more of that joy. Can be a good way to start for people who are right at the journey, like the beginning of the journey. Because I think this is really important. Everybody is starting at a different place when it comes to this idea of joyful leadership. I talk about this idea of this zone of development. If you look at where you're starting from, if you look at where you're beginning, then you can identify the next steps. Because if you decide tomorrow, oh, I'm going to be the most joyful leader there is, and I'm going to be so cheerful every day, that's not going to work. If you're starting from a place where, you're really struggling, for example, so it's about actually understanding where are you now, and then where do you want to move to, and having that sense of this is where I want to get to. And then, as you mentioned, Rachel, those daily practices of what do I do to get there? So I think that's the other thing too for leaders is working out where they are now so they know what the next steps are that are for them is really important.
Yes, yes. And taking those small steps, those small consistent steps, right? Because that is about that's how adults learn, that's how we develop habits, right? That is that theory that we can't just do it all tomorrow, right? But figuring that out. So I like that piece of it. And that reminder to everyone who is listening as well is that do that assessment, figure out where you're at and where the goal is, and then stair stepping your way there. So when you work with leaders, do you work with leaders or do you work with organizations or do you work with both? And what does that work look like that you're doing?
Yeah, so it does vary for the organisation depending on where they're at. So sometimes it will be an individual leader who actually says, I want to develop my leadership. Maybe it's not the time yet to then do that work with the broader team. Sometimes, though, it actually can be the entire team. And that might look like some training around what joyful leadership is and how we can develop that. But sometimes it's actually taking a step back and doing that evaluation first and saying, where are we? What does this look like? And then creating a kind of solution that's very specific to them. Because I think, there's this opportunity to hear the kind of general premise of joyful leadership and to hear these general ideas. But I think then there's a moment to go, actually, what does this look like for me and my organisation? I think that's really important because, we're not denying this work. This work is complex. It's tough. The leadership role is, but also, as we know, changing habits is changing. Changing the way you lead requires support. It requires consistent kind of support and development. And so, each organisation is different. And so, some organisations are kind of almost there. They're like, yeah, we're a really joyful organisation. Tell us more about joyful leadership. And others will come to me and say, hey, the morale is quite low here. We've got really high turnover. Can you help us fix that? So, there's kind of quite different places that people are starting from, and we can support them through each of those. But there's kind of different layers to it. It can be an individual kind of support mentoring process, but it also can be, a whole of organisation development over a long period of time, depending on what they need.
Gotcha. So you can go in and you can deliver a half day or a full day workshop, or you can work with an organization for 6 to 9 months to a year, whatever, wherever they're at. So you'll go in and help the leader or the leadership team assess kind of where they're at, what they need, and then suggest what might be the best solutions for them going forward.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
do
So
you work
and
with, oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, I was just going to say, and that was a really important part of what I created through the PhD was actually we have now a scale to measure joyful leadership. Because prior to that, it was really hard for people to identify like who they are as a leader, what they do, they want to be a more joyful leader, what do we do? Smile more. Like it was kind of that idea, they didn't have a sense of what to do. Whereas now we can actually measure it and say, okay, this is where you are at the moment. This is where we can move to. So I think that's a big part of the, we were talking about that shift before. We now have a much better understanding of it, but also a way to measure it, which is really, I think, important for organizations.
Lovely. So you have an actual assessment that you can put, and is it the assessment for the organization as a whole or the leadership or both?
Both. Yeah. So the leader can do it individually. You can have it as the team, or you can do it as a whole organization. So that's all three rather than both.
Right, all three.
But
You're right.
yeah,
You're right.
yeah. Do you know what I mean? It could be that we just do it with an individual team, and then that kind of filters out, or we could actually go, you know what, we want to look at where the whole organization is, and that's obviously a bigger bit of work. But then what you can do is you can actually tailor it really specifically to what their needs are. So let's say you do that assessment tool, and we find, okay, everybody's really warm, everybody's really caring, but it's all very serious. There's no sense of lightheartedness, for example. We might go, okay, let's do some work around how do we have fun? How do we play in a really safe way? How do we, build that creativity? All of those skills that we know are associated with that sense of playfulness or fun or, lightheartedness. So we might actually target the training specifically to a skill set that they need. Or, we might just do it more generally about how do we build joyful leadership across the whole organization. It could be both.
That's fascinating. I love that. And I love the, again, it adds to that, or it adds that layer of credibility and seriousness, right, to the whole piece about joy, because it really is, it's not fluffy, it is strategic, right? I mean, that is where we're starting from, that this is real, and this is going to help the bottom line of an organization. Like
Yeah.
this is gonna help. I mean, it helps the top. I mean, it helps all of that. But it really, I mean, at the end of the day, right? Organizations are here to make some money. So, and we want to help them do that through, through having joyful leaders. Clearly, we want to create fun and all of that. But it's really about helping the health of the organization and the leader. So lovely.
Absolutely. That financial sustainability is crucial.
Yeah.
We can't ignore that. That's so important. It's essential to the survival of organizations. So what we do, we want to enhance that. And even when you were talking about hospitality before, if we've got a leader who's using this joyful leadership, they're creating more positive environments. That's going to have a flow-on effect to the customers. We see that. And so then, of course, the customers are going to be, more joyful, happy. They're going to have a better time. And then, therefore, that's going to actually enhance the financial sustainability of that hospitality organization, right? So not only is it serious business, it's actually, advantageous from a financial perspective as well.
Absolutely. So I know that there are people listening right now in their cars and they're raising their hand and they're like, I want to be a more joyful leader. I want my organization, or I need my organization to go through some of this. How do you work international? You did say you work across the globe. So wherever people are
Yes.
listening that your services are available, how do they get in touch with you?
So I would absolutely love to hear from them, love to talk with them. Jump on the website is the best way to do it. So www.joyfulleadershipacademy.com.au. You can also connect with me through LinkedIn as well if they're interested. But yeah, the website's definitely the best way to do it. On that website, we have a contact form. All those contacts do come directly to me. So I'm lucky I get to see all these amazing people who are doing amazing things in the world. So it's very, very cool. And so I will respond directly to you. So yeah, jump on the website, send us one of those contact forms, and yeah, just I cannot stress enough, just start somewhere. For anybody who is listening, start with something, start somewhere, give it a go, see the difference it makes, I think is the important thing.
I love that. And I will make sure to put all of those contacts in the show notes so that people can absolutely reach out to you. And I love the fact that that's great advice. Just start somewhere, start small. So as we kind of wrap up here, as we are talking about joy, what is bringing you joy today?
What so many things, to be honest. I have several meetings today with some fabulous leaders, so I'm very excited about those. So I've got a few different meetings there, and of course, at the end of the day, I'll spend time with the family and take the dog for a walk. So I've got a wonderful day to look forward to. So yeah, it's actually a lovely day today.
I love that. Well, I just want to say thank you. I do believe that God gives us all amazing gifts, and I love the fact when people are willing to share those. So, your gift of time today, so I appreciate you for that, and the way in which you are adding to both the research, but then the practical nature of building joy in the world. So I mean, I have goosebumps all over. Just I am appreciative for and thanking you for the work that you were doing and putting out there. So yeah, so I loved our chat today. I will make sure to put all of your contact information so that others who also love the chat can get a hold of you. But just thank you for your time. And for those of you listening, make sure that you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you share this with someone else who just needs a little more joy in their life today. And remember, Rachel from Enjoy, from the Joy Unfiltered podcast. I'm celebrating you today and every day. So have fun, live well, enjoy.